Hey everyone, we just wrapped up our Wednesday night Legacy tournament, and I am jumping back on spoilers here. I'm going to try and wrap this up before midnight here Eastern and get it on YouTube for you guys. We've got Gnarled Colony starting out, a 2 casting cost 2/2, totally fine for limited. The beginning of the curve usually starts at 2 for creatures as you're getting more bang for your buck, and here you have the possibility of kicking it. If you have kicked it, it enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters, and each creature you control with the +1/+1 counter also has trample. Kind of reminds me of the cards from the cons block that actually cared about creatures that have +1/+1 counters and kind of helps out the whole team, giving things like trample, death touch, lifelink. I'd imagine we're going to see something like that in this set, and it's interesting that it's coming in at common. I will be doing a video of the top 10 commons from this set for Pauper as well, but this is just getting started. There are a lot of spoilers left for the day here. Alright, Might of Marasa, an instant for 2, target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. Little overcosted pump spell, not the worst. However, if it was kicked, it gets +5/+5. That's a really large bonus. 5 mana to give +5/+5 is totally fine in limited, and I expect that card will see plenty of play in sealed decks. Oran Skyclave Hierophant. It's a mouthful. Legendary Core Cleric, a 3/3 with lifelink for 4, and whenever Oran or another cleric you control dies, return target cleric card with a lesser converted mana cost from your graveyard to the battlefield. That is going to make your clerics pretty difficult to keep dead. If you've got a bunch of them, you lose a 4 casting cost 1, you're getting a 3 casting cost 1 back. Of course, once Oran goes, that whole cycle stops, so you're going to want to keep this one alive. But that could make it pretty difficult for people to contend with masses of clerics, at least in limited, if you can mash together something. Spitfire Lagic, a lizard for 4, a 3/4 with landfall of dealing 1 damage to each opponent. Probably a fine aggressive creature again for limited. Coveted Prize. This one's pretty dependent on how good the party mechanic ends up being. I don't anticipate it being great, but it is worth noting that there is a Dungeons and Dragon themed set on the set release that they announced for Magic the Gathering. So next year there's going to be a, I believe, Forgotten Realms expansion for Magic the Gathering. We don't know what that means, if it's going to be a box set, if it's going to be a full booster set. I'm not totally positive. I will look into that and find out more, but I did just see the announcement, and I expect that this is all just in preparation for the Dungeons & Dragons theme. You're talking about you having a party here of a Cleric, Rogue, Warrior, and Wizard. Probably going to have some support in that set. So Coveted Prize, 5 casting cost, but costs 1 less for your party. So if you do have a full party, you're paying 1 mana for this thing. You search your library for a card, put it into your hand, shuffle your library. If you have a full party, you can cast that spell. You can cast a spell with a converted mana cost 4 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. So if you have a party, this is one of the best cards ever printed. And I got a feeling I'm going to be saying that a lot. Having a party is going to be a very big deal, not the easiest thing to accomplish. Having 4 creatures on board, a lot of the time that would win the game anyways, but in Commander, I expect it's probably going to be a pretty common thing for people to try and do. Even things like shrines, which you wouldn't think would be super exciting. Once people saw the new shrines, they started digging up the old ones and having a blast with it. So I do expect a card like this to do fun things in limited down the line. Legion Angel, very interesting take on the outside the game mechanic. So we've got a 4/3 flyer for 4, already great stats. When it enters the battlefield, you may reveal a card you own named Legion Angel from outside the game and put it into your hand. So this is like a Squadron Hawk-esque card that can just keep getting an endless stream of Legion Angels if you happen to have them. Now in limited, probably not going to happen. I don't even know what the right play is in limited. Like, if you have 2 of them, you might just sleeve them both up. I'm not entirely sure, because just like a 4/3 for 4 for a 4 mana, just like a flyer with this power to casting cost ratio is really good. I mean, you're twice as likely to draw one of them, but your payoff is way less. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's an odd question. The fact that it's rare means it's probably not going to come up. But I think it's probably going to be a fine card. It's basically a 4-power flyer for 4 that replaces itself, and that seems like it'll be good enough for Constructed if I had to guess. Cliffhaven Sellsword, a 2-mana 3/1 core warrior. I've been known to sleeve up this type of card frequently in Limited. They're a little bit frail, but the 3 power lets you trade up and really can make your combat tricks pretty dangerous, making you push through that early damage, generally putting your opponent to the test. They don't block early when they think you have a combat trick, then later on they have to block, and by then you've already drawn it. I can't tell you how many times I've done that. Here, Farsight Adept, 3 casting costs, 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, you and target opponent each draw a card. 3/3 for 3 with a kind of upside. I mean, sure, you can play a deck that takes advantage of that. There are things like Leovold where your opponent's not going to be drawing a card potentially, depending on when this is coming down. But this card's very interesting. I don't actually know what my preference would be in Limited about this card. Letting my opponent draw a card, but I also draw a card, and it's a fairly costed body, like actually probably pretty good for a 3/3 for 3. I'm not sure how good this will be. Let me know in the comments what you think about this. This, to me, seems like it's going to be a card that you'll solve it at some point. Like, people will figure out in Limited, but it's not a given, and I personally enjoy that. When I take a look at a spoiler and it's not obvious if a card's going to be good or not in Limited, that has my attention. And I do enjoy that a lot more than things just clearly being cookie cutter. Like, this is going to be one of the best cards. These are going to be garbage. Like, how's this going to play out? Cleric of Life's Bond, 2 casting costs, 2/2. Again, generally where you like to be at the beginning of your curve. Whenever another cleric enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. And whenever you gain life for the first time each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Cleric of Life's Bond. Could make this a very dangerous Limited card, and also for Vampire and Cleric decks in Commander. I would not be shocked if this ends up being played in Standard, for example. Just low casting cost creatures that can grow and get bigger are generally pretty good, or at least reasonable in Constructed. And Merfolk Windrobber up next, a 1/1 for 1 flyer. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player mills a card, and you can sack it to draw a card. Activate this ability only if an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. It's fine, I guess. I don't know, milling 1 card at a time. This probably will be very exciting for some people, I will say that. Zareth San, the Trickster, 5 casting costs, 4/4, nice big body there. Flash means that he's going to ambush some smaller creatures and ruin their day. And you can also pay 4 mana to return an unblocked attacking rogue you control to its owner's hand to put him onto the battlefield from your hand, tapped and attacking. So basically ninjutsu for rogues is what this Trickster has in mind. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, you can put target permanent card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Dr. Rich Shea, I believe, will have some recurring nightmares about a card very similar to this. I remember back in Kamigawa block, him being on the wrong side of a legendary creature. I forget what the name of it is. I'm sure he hasn't. Because it steals stuff from the graveyard, and man, that can be very, very powerful. People are going to have a lot of fun with that one. Tajaru Blightblade, 1 casting cost, 1/1 Death Touch, Elf Rogue. The more that they kind of push these mechanics, the more all of these elements become important. The fact that this is a rogue helping out the party, it's an elf, which is going to be potentially useful in some formats. Mostly, I would imagine, for Commander, people will be excited to have new options for elves, though that tribe is pretty stacked. Death Touch is nice, though. Windrider Wizard, 3 casting cost, 2/2 flyer, which is fine. Not overly exciting, but like totally playable. Generally where you want to be when you're drafting a deck is having, this type of thing available to you. And a nice added bonus of whenever you cast an instant, sorcery, or wizard, you can draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Looting is very, very good in Limited. This set is going to be fun to see how the looting plays out. In previous sets, typically you're looting, you're discarding extra lands. You might decide that you're just going to kind of cap out at 5 lands for your deck, and then extra lands, you're just chucking them in the bin, trying to turn them into gas. Zendikar does like those extra land drops, so that's going to be an added layer of analysis that you have to have, figuring out how important your land drops are going to be versus the rest of the cards in your deck. Palaka Predation, 3 casting cost sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a card with converted mana cost 3 or greater, and they discard that card. So an Inquisition of Kozilek that costs 3 mana. Probably not going to be super exciting, but it does have the ability to come into play tapped as a black producing land here, Palaka Caverns. Discard in general, I'm not super stoked about in Limited. There are times where like Mind Rot or like a 3 casting cost card that makes your opponent discard 2 cards can be pretty good depending on the Limited format. There are times where you kind of ramp up to a bomb and you're just playing all your lands, and it's very normal for your opponent to just be at a point where they have just a couple of cards left in hand and they're really important. And those formats, some of the M sets were like that, where it was just brutal. Like you just mind rot somebody and just end the game on the spot, because the early stuff they did wasn't as important as what they were going to be doing, and you could just completely blow them out of the water. As it turns out, a lot of other formats, their hands get emptied too quickly, and sometimes they even have like extra lands that they can discard. So it really depends on the format if discard is good or worth the tempo. I mean, paying 3 mana to get a card out of their hand, I mean, that is a lot. Emeria Captain, 4 casting cost, 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature in your party. So you're potentially getting a 5/5 flyer with vigilance here. Even a 4/4 flyer for 4. Heck, even a 3/3 flyer for 4 with vigilance is very, very good. So this card, pretty impressive, and it does, because it is a warrior, when it enters the battlefield, it will be a trigger. It's not as it enters, so this will enter the battlefield, count as a warrior. So if you have just like one other member of your party at this point, I think that's going to be a fair value for your sealed deck. Tajaru Snarecaster, a 3 casting cost, 1/4 with reach. It's a rogue. Maybe you're going to be interested in using that to fill out your party. Spitfire Lagic, if we're going to call it that. Look at the art on this. Just wild, super colorful. I love it. This reminds me of a drawing I used to make as a kid all the time. I would just make this drawing of a dragon on a mountaintop with a moon behind it, with like a knight with a spear, kind of like Dragonlance. Like, this is very reminiscent of that to me. Definitely a reference none of you guys are going to get, because, you know, I was just drawing for myself back then. But really, that use of the negative space to highlight your subject is, I mean, it's a little played out, but I love it. I just really do. And this is a really bright and colorful piece, and I do enjoy that. We've already covered this card, but this is another take on it, which is really cool. The Taunting Arbor Mage, 3 casting cost for a 2/3. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, all creatures able to block target creature this turn do so. For 6 mana, you're basically clearing the way for all of your attackers, which is how these type of cards play out. And there was a card in Theros. It was some type of chimera. It was like 6 casting costs or something. It's an 8/5. It's actually in the new starter sets, the Vito versus King Kong or whatever it is starter decks, the arena starter sets. And I was playing that against my nephew James, and I mean, I got that down and I was like, oh no, like I'm just going to attack and he's going to, like, the game's over. And he was thinking about like how things were going to go, and it's like, no, the game is over. Like, all of your guys have to block here. The rest of it's getting through. That's going to be 20 damage at this point. And that's usually how these cards work out, is they're kind of like a one-shot kill. And, you know, even if your opponent like had parity with you, all of a sudden, like, they could be ahead on board. It didn't matter. As long as you can deal lethal with your guys, these type of cards can be backbreaking in Limited. And generally, it's a pretty powerful effect. The fact that this comes down and does it to one of your creatures makes it even better than most of the other effects. Usually you get something like a Prized Unicorn down. It costs 4 mana. They're generally expensive effects, and then they kill the creature, and it doesn't really work out. This, you play it, put it on one of your creatures, turn stuff sideways, game over. That's how you draw it up. We'll see how it actually plays out at the pre-releases. Archpriest of Iona. 1 casting cost creature here with a 2/, but its power is equal to the number of creatures in your party, so potentially a 4/2. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, target creature gets +1/+1 and flying until end of turn. So we can actually be hitting for 5 and does count as a cleric towards your party. So worst case scenario, you got a 1/2 for 1, which is pretty bad. But if you do have a full party, the card's going to be doing some work. Akoum? I'm not actually sure. How do you say that, guys? You let me know in the comments. Spell that out phonetically, I guess. Akoum Hellhound. Steplinks is back. 1 red mana for a 0/1. Doesn't sound like an aggressive creature, but when you pair this with fetch lands, you are smashing for 4 damage. And, I mean, Steplinks was a legacy playable card in Zoo for quite some time. Now, we've got a red version making it even more aggressive. I will not be surprised to see this seeing play even potentially in Legacy in some type of aggressive red deck. I mean, this is a lot of power for 1 mana, and you're going to be potentially hitting for 4 damage with your 1-drop, which is a lot more than many of the other options out there. So, doesn't have haste. You know, you're going to need to hit multiple times with it to catch up with Goblin Guide. The first time you connect off of a fetch land, you've caught up with Goblin Guide. After that, you're outpacing him, which is really saying something, and I'm actually excited about this printing. Akoum Warrior, a 4/5 Trampler that costs 6 mana. Probably going to be a filler card in your sealed deck. It's a big body that can also come down as a land. So late game, if you're kind of flooded out, maybe you cash him in as a big body. Maybe you cash in those juicy landfall triggers, and just going to be entering the battlefield tapped and tapping for red. Balaged Recovery. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand for 3. Incredible that Regrowth at one point was just untouchable in terms of just a scary, restricted card in Vintage, and now we're seeing things kind of creeping more in that direction where, is it really that good? I mean, it depends on what you're bringing back is the reality. This one at 3 mana, obviously not as good as Regrowth, but does have the option of entering as a land tapped, and I'll tell you, in Limited, I don't love this type of card. I have historically really enjoyed playing Regrowth in Vintage, where you can bring back things like Time Walk and Gush, and these cards are really dependent on how good the cards are that you're bringing back. Usually they're going to be instants or sorceries, things that easily get into the graveyard and you're happy to bring back and play for a second time. Khalni Ambush. Target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. For 3 mana, I mean, removal, the best removal in the set ends up just being the best removal you can have. That's how these pools work. There are formats where you're paying 6 mana for a murder effect at sorcery speed, and you still sleeve it up because it's literally just the best option. We'll see how good this removal ends up being in the context of the rest of the set. It's probably going to be fine-ish. The fact that it can come in as a land will likely offset some of the issue with the casting cost. Of course, the cheaper a card like that is, the better it generally will play out for you. Keeping 3 mana open and not using it, not super exciting. It's just a lot to keep open, especially if you don't end up having an opportune time to use it. Sejiri Shelter. Target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. Again, it's too much mana for this effect, but may end up being offset by the fact that it can be a land. And again, if it's kind of the best combat tricks you have. Combat tricks that cost 1 tend to slot in really well around things. Obviously, I mean, at 1 mana, if you have any mana left over, you're going to be able to cast it. Leaving 2 or more mana open does create some issues with your mana curve, to say the least. Mana efficiency can be very important in determining who wins a match. The person who uses their mana best often ends up winning the match. Of course, you can turn into the land. Prowling Felidar, a Vigilance 2/3 for 4, but the landfall, when it enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. So kind of later game, this becomes better, where you can potentially play this on turn 4, turn 5, play a land, becomes a 3/4, kind of start outpacing on curve. Hopefully it doesn't just get killed. But I think a lot of these landfall cards, when you're kind of more into the game, if you still have lands to be able to play and make the drop, they certainly become a lot better. And check out that alternate art. I just think that's so much cooler. The Hedron art, bright, colorful. I really enjoy that they're doing some different things with the look of Magic cards. And, I mean, this one just beautiful use of color. Drana, the Last Blood Chief. Drana is back. The legendary vampire shows up here as a cleric. When it attacks, the defending player chooses a non-legendary creature card in your graveyard, and then you return it to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter. Very often, cards like this don't give you much of a choice. You have like a single non-legendary creature in your graveyard, and it's just coming back. And I expect this card to be very good in Limited. I mean, really, really good in Limited. You're talking about a creature with flying, huge power, huge backside, great casting costs, and what an upside of getting creatures back from your graveyard. But I also expect people to have a lot of fun with this in Commander. Expedition Diviner, a 4 casting cost 3/2 with flying. As long as you control another wizard when it dies, as long as you control another wizard, Expedition Diviner has, when this creature dies, draw a card. So pretty good overall. 3 power, 4 casting costs is solid. Not like insane, but solid. You'd like a bigger backside on there, but totally fine. And the fact that when it dies, you're going to be drawing a card some of the time makes this something that's not going to be embarrassing at all for Limited. Zulaport Duelist, 1 casting cost, 1/1 with flash. When it enters the battlefield, up to 1 target creature gets -2/-0 until end of turn. Its controller mills 2 card. It's an interesting combat trick, potentially jumping in, chump blocking, or trading with a 1 toughness creature on the ground. And then also shrinking another creature makes this, I think, probably the most interesting combat trick that we've seen so far. Grotag Bug Catcher, really interesting art on that one as well. A goblin that loves his job. A 2 casting cost, 1/2, but whenever it attacks, it gets +1 until end of turn for each creature in your party. He is a warrior, so he's going to be at least a 2/2 attacker. So not a very good blocker, but you know what? Goblins usually tend to be a little bit cowardly when it comes to blocking, but once you let them start attacking stuff, they don't care what's in the way. And I think this one's going to be pretty solid in Limited as an aggressive creature. Beautiful treatment of that Akoum Hellhound that we saw before. I am really liking these alternate art cards, and I mean, we'll see what they end up being worth. It is very interesting to see these. I'm just liking them. I don't know if they're going to be worth very much. I'd kind of like to see a clear line of what it looks like to collect, for example, all of the alternate art cards. Like, that's the type of thing that I think there's no call to action here for Wizards. If we're talking from like a business perspective, they're kind of like saying like, oh, here are these cards and they're really cool. But like, it'd be cool if it was like, oh, there's 27 of them, get all 27. Like, got to catch them all. Like, that was probably the greatest call to action of all time. It's not clear to me how many of these are, what the purpose is. So that's the only criticism I have so far is what do they mean and kind of how does that fit in. If it's like 27 and you show somebody like, hey, here's 3 binder pages filled with them, like, I'm on board. Let's see here. We already all the way through? No, we can't be all the way through. I think we got a repeat card here. Oran Skyclave Hierophant. We already covered him. Got an extra copy in there. Deadly Alliance. Okay, this is... Sorry about that, guys. This one costs 1 less. So again, destroy target creature or planeswalker for just 1 mana. All you need is a party. Probably going to be fine, as is. 5 casting costs to destroy a creature or planeswalker. Actually, usually fine in Limited. And of course, cost reduction. Really, really nice on that. Ravager's Mace. We got a 3 casting cost. Equipment. Equipment's going to be big in this set. And when it enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +1/+0 for each creature in your party. And has Menace. So you're going to be able to slam this thing down have a creature pick it up, and then the equip cost later on is pretty costly at 4 mana, but Menace and a potentially big pump is very interesting. So gut check, I actually don't think this is going to be great. I think, assuming that it's a cleric or rogue or warrior or wizard that it's being attached to, bare minimum it's getting +1/+0, and I'm not sure that that's really enough, to be honest. Like, for 3 mana to give a creature +1/+0, I don't know how much you need. I mean, the Menace is fine. Yeah, I don't know. This one feels like it might be a trap. I guess we'll see. Thwart the Grave. 6 casting costs 1 less for each creature in your party. This completely undoes a TPK. It returns target creature and up to 1 target cleric, rogue, warrior, and wizard from your graveyard to the battlefield. This card people are going to have a lot of fun with in Limited. This is going to be busted with changelings, and I think people will just love bringing back tons of stuff from the graveyard. It's a little odd that it costs 1 less for each creature in your party. It's like you've already got a party and now you're bringing back another party, but that's fine. People are going to have fun with this, and I expect in Limited this probably will be a consideration. I don't usually love cards that bring stuff back from the graveyard in Limited, mostly because sometimes there's nothing to bring back. Like, if you're just curving out and things are going well and you start drawing a bunch of cards that only bring stuff back from the graveyard, it's a good way to turn a solid lead into just a fistful of bricks. So I don't know. It's might be good enough for Limited, though. I mean, it's a huge upside. Bringing back like 5 creatures is just massive. Swarm Shambler. 1 casting cost creature enters the battlefield with 1/+1/+1 counter, but whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it becomes the target of a spell or ability, create a 1/1 green insect creature token, and you can pay 1 and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on it. So kind of mechanic that we've seen before. There's been creatures very similar to this in the past that can kind of grow themselves over time. This is also similar to the Outlast ability from the Cons block, but the fact that you can do this at instant speed, very significant. If somebody's attacking you with a 1/1, for example, you could block and then tap this and get bigger, and then just every turn just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and making it harder to attack, and then the turns they don't attack, you just grow it anyways. Usually your curve begins at 2, but this would very, very likely be an exception to that. This seems like a fine card to me for Limited. Despite starting out just as a 1/1, it seems like it could get out of hand pretty quickly. Nighthawk Scavenger. 3 casting costs, flying, death touch, lifelink. This is a vampire Nighthawk and then some. It's got power is equal to 1 plus the number of card types among cards in your opponent's graveyard. This is some kind of a reverse Tarmogoyf situation where you're getting, very likely instant sorceries, a fetch land in there. A 3 for 3 is interesting, but in multiplayer, long games, I mean, you're talking about most likely the whole boat. This could easily be up to 7 because we've got artifact, creature, instant sorcery, enchantment, planeswalker, tribal. I mean, it's pretty big. It's pretty big for 3 mana, and they've got the full art treatment as well. Dauntless Survivor. 2 casting costs, 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. We've seen this type of card many times, going all the way back, I think, to like Urza's Destiny, maybe even earlier. There might have been one in like one of the Mirage or Tempest blocks, some type of like Bonded Beetle or something. Sometimes it goes on him and he's a 2/2 for 2. Sometimes he helps out another creature. And the fact that a lot of the time you may have cards that care about +1/+1 counters and give them special abilities are going to make this guy a card that you're likely to sleeve up in green decks in your pre-release pool, for example. Expedition Skulker has death touch as long as you control another rogue. So a rogue that cares about more rogues. We're going to see a bit of that with the different creature types caring about other brothers or sisters of that creature type. And here, death touch on a 2/2 is a type of evasion. It's pretty solid. in terms of keywords that you can have on a 2 casting cost creature. Nice to be able to trade up with something really scary, and also good to be able to turn sideways into larger creatures and just get past them or trade. It's up to them. You'd rather be up to you, but, you know, you're turning stuff sideways. You can see what happens. Tabarak's Hope's Demise. 3 casting cost, 2/2 flyer. Right off the bat, it would not be terrible, but we got a big upside here because it's a rare. He has lifelink as long as he has 5 or more +1/+1 counters. How do you get those on there, you ask? Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on him. If that creature was a cleric, you may draw a card. If you do, lose a life. So you're going to be able to mulch your clerics to grow this guy and draw cards. This guy's going to be very, very good in pre-release, and don't be surprised if people have some fun with this in Commander. I recall a long time ago playing in, it was some type of, I think it was like a GPT or something. It was some type of tournament. I didn't even know what the heck the organized play side of it was, because back then I was just playing for prizes. They had a good prize, but they also had queuing for, it was either like some type of PTQ or GP trial, whatever it was. It was Onslaught and Legion's block. And I just always remember how good my sealed pool was. Like, I just smashed, went undefeated with my sealed pool. I think it might have been the first time I think that's actually how I found out about intentional drawing, because I was just like smashing tournaments and just like not drawing with people at the end. And someone explained to me they were a pro player and they were like, hey, this is how IDs work. And I was like, oh, okay. So I can just like hang out for an hour? That makes sense. So draw into the final round. In the top 8, I draft a, in my mind, unbeatable soldier deck. The person to my left, I feed a really good elf deck. And my thought process is I'm just going to play this person in the finals because their deck is going to be bananas. But there's no way I can lose in combat because I'm on a soldier deck with, I think I had 5 Daru Stingers. I mean, it was so good. I mean, I know this is old man ELD talk here. You guys probably don't know what these cards are, but let's just say it was a deck that could not lose during the combat step. It had creatures that tapped to do X damage, where X is equal to its power, and they were like 4 casting cost creatures that when you show more soldiers, they'd come in as like a 5/5. So it was just like tap to do 5, had a bunch of them. The whole deck was soldiers. Every card in the deck was soldiers. It was so good. Played against a cleric deck. He never attacked me once. Did not attack me once the whole match. He got out Cabal Archon and just sacked clerics the whole time. Just sacked 10 clerics to do 20 damage. You sack a cleric, gain 2 life, lose 2 life, and just beat me without ever attacking me. I couldn't even believe it. It was incredible. So this brings up that type of memory to me. Sacking clerics, drawing cards. You're losing the life, but like, let's be honest, you're probably going to get some really positive things going in your direction. And ultimately, this guy is going to end up being the 7/7 lifelink flyer, which is a big ask to deal with in limited. I mean, once you get that large, there's not a ton of removal that'll deal with it. You pretty much have to have premium removal only, and nothing's really going to trump that in combat. Umara Mystic, a flyer. Whenever you cast an instant, sorcery, or wizard, it gets +2/+1. These cards generally are tough and limited. It's like you're not going to have as many good instants and sorceries. So stuff like this sometimes can be really good in constructed. The casting cost on this likely, I mean, it'll be prohibitive at 3. You'd want this to be like a 2-mana card and just like be able to play tons of stuff. But +2/+0 is definitely something. And we've seen very similar cards to this in the past. Of course, they didn't care about wizards. That's a thing now. But you know, it's a wizard. It's fine-ish. I don't know. It's probably okay to play in limited. It will definitely fail you sometimes, though. Maul of the Skyclaves. When it enters the battlefield, attached to a creature you control, which is something we're seeing a bunch of so far, is the equipment's entering and attaching, which is a big tempo saver. I mean, one of the big problems with equipment is you cast it and then it's just a brick on the battlefield, and the next turn you go to equip it and then they respond with removal, and then you're just like finding a new hobby. Here, it gives a creature +2/+2 flying and first strike. This will be an incredibly good card in limited. being able to take a guy, give him wings, even your 2-drop on turn 2. Like, let's say you start with a 3-1 flyer on turn 2, and you jam this, and now you're hitting for 5 in the air. That game may be pretty close to over. The first strike is going to make it incredibly difficult to block. Nothing's really going to get in the way of it upstairs. So if you can just hold down the fort for 4 more turns, that is going to be it. Or 3 more turns, you're hitting for 5 right there. So this card, very scary and limited, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of Loxodon Warhammer. Of course, the lifelink on that card made it virtually unbeatable and limited, but this one has a little bit of a feel like that, where this is going to be very difficult for people to handle. This one is going to do 1 damage, and can't read the rest of it. It's going to do 1 damage to something, I think to something that you don't control, and it can also turn into a tapped land. This one is your opponent's going to lose 4 life, and you're going to gain 4 life, and that could come in as a swamp. Let's see. This one is, it's going to be your attacker or blocker, and it's going to be twice the number of your, twice the size of your party. So it's going to do, like, if you have a party full, it's going to do 8 damage to an attacking or blocking creature. Sorry about the foreign cards there, guys. They're not spoiled in English yet. There are translations out there, which I guess I could have pulled up more accurately. Rolling Vortex. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, it deals 1 damage to them. When a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast that spell, Rolling Vortex deals 5 damage to that player. And pay a red, your opponent cannot gain life this turn. Kind of a mini Sulfuric Vortex. I don't know. It's interesting. It's definitely going to punish certain cards in, like, it's a big bar for Vintage, but it does stop a lot of different cards that people tend to have for free. So there are alternate casting costs, which makes things no mana, but there's also cards that just actually have no mana, like Baubles and Moxes. So that's an interesting card. That is an interesting card, and also, chips away at them. In worst case scenario, when your opponent plays Tendrils at you for 20, you can make it so they won't gain any life back before you die. Coralhelm Chronicler, 3 casting costs, 2/2. When you cast a kicked spell, draw a card, then discard a card, giving extra value to all of those kickers. And then when it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 5 cards of your library. You can reveal a card with a kicker ability from among them and put it into your hand, and then put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So 3 casting costs, 2/2. That replaces itself and gives you a little bit of a draw engine. We'll see how many cheap kickers they are. That'll be the type of determining factor for constructed play, is if you can have cheap enough spells to get value, it could potentially see some play. Soul Shatter. Each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker with the highest converted mana cost among all creatures and planeswalkers they control. So whatever the biggest one they have, if they've got a big old planeswalker or a big old creature, that one's going to go. And this one's probably just solid removal. I mean, one of the problems with edict effects traditionally is they end up sacking some garbage token. Here, they're going to sacrifice their biggest mana cost, which is very often the best thing on the board. So certainly very good in your pre-release pool. And I also enjoy the art on this a lot, just to throw that out there. I do think that's really cool art. And, can take down some planeswalkers against those creatureless decks, which is pretty nice to have the utility in your removal. Somebody jams an Oko on turn 3 without previously playing a creature, or even if they have a cheap creature out, it doesn't matter. You're going to clear it, so that's pretty solid. Tangled Floral Hedron, a creature that can tap for a green, or, we don't even have it, or it just comes in as a land tapped that can tap for a green. So this can be kind of mana ramp early, and just either way, however it works for you. All right, here's one to be excited about. Emeria's Call, 7 casting costs. Okay, a little expensive, but you create 2 4/4 White Angel Warrior tokens with flying, and non-angel creatures you control gain indestructible until your next turn. I would say thank goodness that this is a sorcery and not an instant. That would be just devastating to be able to play this in the middle of combat and block and just have your guys be indestructible. So, all right. I mean, this is a lot of value, but the thing that I thought was most interesting about this is Emeria, the Shattered Skyclave, enters the battlefield. You can pay 3 life. If you don't, it enters tapped. So we have lands that can come into play and tap for mana. You pay 3 life, which very often in Constructed isn't really that big a deal. Certainly there are some formats where that's a big problem, but not missing the land drop here makes this very, very interesting. And I think one of the more intriguing cards in the set, I mean, lands coming into play tapped are pretty much hot garbage. And I think this is going to be a very interesting card for, I mean, certainly for Limited. We'll see what the applications of this are. The versatility is just really hard to gauge right now, to be able to have cards that you can use as part of your mana base, but can also be just an insane bomb later. And of course, if you can return lands, I guess people should probably be speccing on trade routes at this point. That card's probably going to go through the roof. All right. I think that's it. Well, thanks for watching. It took me right up to midnight there, so I'm going to turn in. That is all for this one, but don't worry, there is a lot more. You can check out our older videos, and we're always putting out new videos from ELD's Time Vault Games in Bellingham, Massachusetts. If you want to help the channel, of course, you can like, subscribe, share, tap that notification bell so you can know the next time our new videos come out. Thanks for watching.